Hi, welcome to Overseers of Freedom. Amy Earle here, and I'm joined by Amanda Bush and Kimberly Lowry. And we are on episode, so I'm not sure if we can even call these episodes right now, because what we're doing is each month we are going to be discussing a book. And at the beginning of the month, we're going to be talking about like a pre-brief, an introduction to the book and some things to look for, why we think it's important that you read it, and some points to be looking for. And then at the end of the month, we're going to have a debrief about it. And once you've read it, we'll be able to come back and really kind of dig into it and have a really great discussion about it. So this episode, we are doing an intro for the book Dumbing Us Down by John Taylor Gatto. Is it Gatto? Gatto? Kimberly's telling me it's Gatto. So this book is a collection of essays and speeches that he has written over the years. He was a school teacher in New York State, and I really enjoyed before I had read the first essay in here is called The 7-Lesson School Teacher, and I've read that several times. This was my first time going through the entire collection of his, and so hearing kind of his background. But he was voted Teacher of the Year for New York State in 1991, and the essay, The 7-Lesson School Teacher, was the speech he was given. The speech he gave when he accepted that award. And it is like jaw-dropping. And what's really fascinating, I'm going to just say this, that's really fascinating to me. I'm thinking, so 1991, that's the year I graduated from high school. And so 31 years ago now. And I'm thinking, in today's context, what if somebody was to give this speech today? And I was thinking this would never fly. And the fact that he went on to teach and he went on to continue to give these messages, it, like, astounds me. But then as you move through the book, you find that he began to be more censored, and he began to not be able to share his message as much. People were offended by what he said. And you find that he talks about that in the postscript from the publisher. Anyways, just a fascinating book. Amanda, do you want to talk a little bit about your thoughts?
Sure. So the first time I read this was in 2013. We had our kids home from school for about 3 years. We'd been homeschooling when we actually listened to this as a family on a drive to Disneyland. And when we got to Disneyland, and we specifically listened to the first one, the 7-Lesson School Teacher. And when we got to Disneyland, we were waiting outside of our hotel for the shuttle to take us to the park. And there was an elementary school across the parking lot, across the street from where we were waiting. And our kids at the time were 14, 13, and 11. And just watching those kids run around and the bell ringing and the teachers, the fence around the schoolyard. So one of the comparisons he makes is the similarity between public schools and factories, or public schools and jails. And our kids were just watching this for about 10 minutes while we were waiting for the bus. And they started having conversation amongst themselves about, look at those kids in jail. Like, they made this connection that the similarities between the way we treat our children in public school and the way we treat inmates is very, very similar. And for me, watching my kids make that connection was super interesting. And like we talked about before, Kimberly mentioned being kind of off-put by this book the first time. My husband was completely offended by it, and sure that was not the way the public school system is. And even though we'd been homeschooling for 3 years, he still had we public school or private homeschool because it's what's right for us, but the public school, there's still nothing wrong with it. And this book exposes 1990, and his career started well before that, what he had experienced. And for me, this time around, what really came through was, I felt like through this book, he was saying, this is what's going on, but there was kind of a question as to why. Why are we doing this to our children? Why are parents just handing their kids over? Why is the government dumbing down the kids? Why are they taking away thinking? Why are they taking away freedom of thought? Why are they taking away creativity? But that's what's happening. But there was the question of why. And now reading it 30 years later and seeing what is currently happening in our world, there is no longer the question of why. We now know, because we have seen it come to fruition. What started 60 years ago in our public school system has now, the purpose of what happened through those first 30 years and then the next 30 years has now become very clear. The goal was to create a society of people who only know what to think and don't know how to think. And we did that by giving our children over to a system where they are told minute by minute what to do and what to think and what to say. And it was fascinating for me this time around, because it's like, for me, it was like reading a history book. It was like, that was written 30 years ago, right? And then being like, oh, now I see how that all happened and how that all tied together and the result of those decisions.
I love that. Like Amanda said, the first time I read this, and I think it must have been around 2010. So I had been homeschooling for a couple of years, but I just got so angry and frustrated reading this book because I thought, no way are these the lessons that kids are learning. I didn't learn these things. My kids didn't learn these things when they were in public school. The public school kids now are not learning these things. And it was just hard for me to get through it because I could see a couple of them, but I couldn't see all of them and the way he was explaining it. But now reading it again, 10, 12 years later, oh my goodness, I'm like, how did I not recognize it before? But when you have lived it and you have this allegiance to it, and it's so hard to get away from that, even with all the studying I did about how good homeschool was, and even being a homeschooler, I was still, your mind is still in that conveyor belt mentality, and it takes a long time to get out of it. And so this book was really hard for me to read in the beginning. So if you're reading this book and you want to throw it across the room, I understand your feelings. I was there, but give it a chance. Take what you can from it and read it again and again. And then, observe those around you.
And I say one thing really quick? And I think with that whole, for me, when we started homeschooling, I felt very defensive but this is the right choice for us. It doesn't have to be the right choice for you. Everyone can choose for themselves. Public school is okay for some kids. Public school is okay for some families. What this book does is challenge that idea. So I think for me, like Kim, when you first read it, you're like, yeah, but because what he does is he calls out the public school system completely and totally from an insider who was voted Teacher of the Year in New York State. That says a lot. That his views are the reality of what's going on, that we as parents are either oblivious to or we're turning a blind eye. And this book challenges the idea that public school is good for some kids. Because really, if what he's describing is true, which now looking back we can say it's absolutely true, then public school is not the right place for any children. And that's a super difficult thing to say out loud.
I had a message come through a friend of mine who has been following the podcast. And she said, I went to the library and grabbed the book. And she said, just reading the back of it, I am triggered. And she said, I want to know if I should read this. So she's a young mom, and her Kids are in school. And she's like, is this book anti-public schooling? Because I'm already anxious, but this is where my kids need to be. And so is this book is it going to cause me more issues? Should I not read this? And I took a minute. I took a beat before answering. Oh, you guys. Because Amanda, like you said, you're like,
how do you do this? And then tell your friends, yeah, it's okay that your kids are in public school. If this is the reality, and I totally know what you mean. I mean,
and it comes from the idea that we cannot do it as well as the school. I'm okay. This year, next month, I will be 49 years old. So I am not a spring chicken. I graduated from high school 30 years ago. I have seen a lot. And I would submit, my hypothesis is that you can take your child out of school and do nothing with them. And do nothing with them. And when I say nothing with them, I mean nothing academically. Like, live life with them. Cook with them, take them to the store, go to the park. Like, do what you do. And be better off. And be better off than sending them to public school.
And I think part of that is because, okay, people cannot wrap their mind around that because we have been instilled with the idea that you must go to public school to go to college, go to a good college, to get a good job so you can buy stuff, right? That is our whole purpose in life. And so if we say, instead, your child is a genius and has a mission and a purpose, and they need an individualized education for that, that is a completely different way of educating a child versus you need a job so you can buy stuff. And that's what has been drilled into every single person. And then if you take your kids home and people say, well, what if they don't educate them? Well, then what's going to happen? Then they're going to be on government assistance. Like everything goes back to, well, if you don't get the education you need, you're going to be on government assistance and I'm going to have to pay for that, right? So if they don't get a good education in school and get a job.
Okay, and we're already paying for that. Well, like already they just told us we have to pay for everybody's education. Right. Sorry.
To know the number of people on public assistance, the percentage that were in public school.
Yeah. How many homeschoolers are on public assistance? I want to know that fact.
Right.
That's funny, Kim. I've never actually even, like, that particular train of thought, like, that's why people are, like if we don't educate them, what will happen? I feel
like that's where all the lines lead back to, right?
Like public assistance?
Yeah. Because why else would we care if somebody else's kids are educated? Why do I care if my neighbor's kids go to college or get a diploma? The only reason I would care is if they're on government assistance and I have to pay for it. Because there's so many
challenge that. I would challenge first. So here, this would be interesting. Like if we got 100 people together, of that 100 people, how many people really care if somebody is homeschooled or not? And how many of those like lay people, meaning just the ordinary people, would be like, well, yeah, the person that's homeschooled is going to be smarter. Like they're going to do better. Right.
Well, I think the judgment
go ahead. Like
is often more to do with fear of what it means about them. Does that make sense? Like if you're choosing to homeschool your kids and I'm not, then, it's that whole idea of like, when I perceive someone doing something different than me, then I'm afraid that they think what I'm doing is wrong. So right. I have to tell them what they're doing is wrong so that what I'm doing is right.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Let's go down this path. Why do we have compulsory education then? If there's kids there that don't want to learn and they'd rather stay home and play video games, why are we forcing them to be at school? I don't think they should be at school. Why should my money be wasted on somebody who doesn't want to be there? So what's the reasoning for forcing them to be there?
So I think the reason for forcing them to be there, and this is where I was like, I challenge that they're afraid. And I think we have to define who they is when we're talking about they. Who are we referring to? Now, I think the reason why the government has instilled compulsory education is for, I think the party line probably is we have to give them an education so that they can support themselves. That's probably the party line, which is rapidly disintegrating if we're paying for all of public school and all of college and they cannot pay their student loans. Like literally this whole thing is falling apart. But I think they would say that that's why, but really they are looking for a compliant citizenry. Like really they're saying we need you to be compliant. And the easiest way is if we can get you into school for 20 years of your life and like all of the time, like we are going to completely brainwash you so that you are compliant, which has led to, and when we say not knowing how to think, ask yourself, when you are looking for something, how are you looking? You start Googling and looking for, what does the expert say? I need an expert to tell me what to think about XYZ. I need the newscaster to tell me what to think about this news situation. I need the doctor to tell me what to think about my health. I need, the expert in history to tell me what happened, to break it down. I think we've lost the ability to discuss, to ask questions, to, but this is a fascinating question. I think this is a really fascinating discussion.
So I do agree with you that I think that the government wants a compliant people, but I guess what I'm saying is, like, my neighbor who's not involved in the government, why would they care if I educate my kid a certain way, right? Like, what does it matter to them? Because I've had a lot of people talk to me about homeschool, and well, it's a good thing because when I was in Alaska, I was signed up under a state program. So I had a lot of control over what I taught, but for a while there, I had to report to a certified teacher. And so many people would say, oh, it's a good thing you have a certified teacher to help you or to make sure your kids are learning what they should. And that goes along with the experts, certainly. But I'm thinking, why do you care? Why does it matter to you that my kids have the education you think they should have, right? Yeah.
Well, and I think that comes back to Amy's question when you say, let's define who they are, because we have different levels of they. We have they, the federal government. We have they, the local government. We have they, our neighbors. We have they, our children's friends, parents. And we have they, our family members. And they all have.
And that's a big one too, right there, because that's the hardest one to talk to about it when they disagree.
Their motivation for critiquing or criticizing is different at each of those levels. And depending on where they're coming from. Like, so many times I feel like when people are like, well, I could never do that, or your kids can't get the education that you want them to have or that they should have, I feel like they're coming from a defensive mode of, well, if she's right, then what I'm doing is wrong.
Right.
And then you've got the good meaning grandparents or aunts and uncles that are afraid that they're going to end up supporting your children because you didn't give them the education they want. Or that they, and so I think we have to be careful when we say, well, they think is, and I think this goes in all levels of life, who is they when you're talking about this? So we can all make sure we're on the same page of why they do or they say what they say.
So that's an interesting thing to think about, because we all come with our own biases and our own experiences, and we always think that not always, but a lot of time thinks what we had was the best, or what what we're doing is the best. And I find it so fascinating that when people decide to homeschool, they like do all this research and read all these books, and they research curriculum, and they pray about it, and they take time to think about it most of the time. It's usually not a split second decision. But when we put our kids in public school, it's like you don't read about the curriculum, you don't read books about the pros and the cons, you don't pray about it, it's just, here's your backpack and get on the bus, right? Like, we're not doing the same kind of due diligence for public school as we are for when we homeschool or choose an alternate way of educating our children typically.
That's so fascinating, Kimberly, because I had never thought about that. But I've shared before about our story about how we ended up homeschooling. And it was because of my daughter. My daughter had had an IEP since she was 2 years old. And because of that, we were very, very involved in her education. So at 12, 10 years later, when I walked into the public schools in California, I was like, no, this isn't going to work for Katrina. And if it's not going to work for Katrina, I'm not doing two different things. I'm going to take the boys out. If it had just been the boys, I probably would have just signed them up and walked away, because it was what I knew. It had to do with my level of involvement in Katrina's education that made me question what I was signing them up for. And I had never actually thought about that before, that it really was about how much research and how much involvement I had in my daughter's education at that point that made me choose an alternative for our whole family.
So here's a question. It's simple. It's easy for me at this point to be like, literally homeschool your children. Like, just get them out with what is happening in the world. Like you can't, especially like, go read this book and then start like really do some searching. But how do we help people make that transition? How do we help them be able to see, maybe give them the confidence or a vision, or like, what, do you know what I'm saying? Like, I know that for me, a lot of my friends that are listening to this, their kids are in school. They're young moms, their kids are in elementary school, they've got babies, and there's so much going on. And the thought of having your kids home all the time and having the responsibility to not just keep them alive, but also educate them, that seems daunting. And when, he makes the comment in here that I feel like is such a bold comment when he says, right here, this is in the 7-lesson school teacher. Where is it? No middle-class parents I have ever met actually believe that their kid's school is one of the bad ones. Not one single parent in many years of teaching. And that's a conversation that I have. Every single one of my friends whose kids are in school are like, but we're in a good school. But we're so lucky because we've got the good school. And so we understand that there's a problem with all the other schools, but we've got the good one. And, it's not my responsibility but I think my mission, like what I want to do, is to empower moms to believe that they can.
Right. Well, and aren't we, the three of us, living proof that we can? Like, it's much more natural than I thought it was going to be. And it is much more natural if you don't try to do school at home. If you read books about homeschooling and you learn about homeschooling and you do it your way, I recommend reading a Thomas Jefferson Education, which we discussed last time. But it should not look like public school, and you will have a harder time if you try to make it look like public school. It becomes a way of life. And I think, I don't know how we get the word out there that you can do it, because I think it's made to seem so complicated. It's purposely made to seem complicated, like you cannot do it if you're not an expert. Because I've been asked a million times, well, are you a certified teacher that you think you can homeschool your kids? Or what training do you have? And I'm like, I'm their mom, right? Nobody knows my children better than me. And so we need to let other moms know that, yes, you can do it. You're the expert in your home. You're the expert of your children. Who better to give them an individualized education than the person who knows them best?
I love all of that. I was at a seminar with Oliver DeMille. I was probably 6 months into Thomas Jefferson education. I went to hear him speak. And he said, the key to making this work is to stop trying to homeschool your children and instead educate them at home. And let go of this idea of school, because everything that we wrap our mind around with school, and the Dumbing Us Down book outlines all the problems with school. We don't need school at home. Our children do not need to be doing math for 45 minutes and spelling for 45 minutes and then take a 30-minute break outside with a recess monitor. And then that's not why you bring your children home. You bring your children home so that you can educate them, so you can teach them how to find the answers they're looking for. That is your only job. Because once your children learn how to figure out what they want to figure out, there's no limit to what they will learn in and of themselves. And that is actually a very easy thing to do, is to teach your children how to learn. That is so easy. What is hard is it takes 20 years to teach children not to think, and to teach children there is a specific answer, and their creativity doesn't matter, and coming to their own conclusions doesn't matter. It takes 20 years to take that out of children. That's why they are in public school their entire childhood, because children are full of the desire to learn. You look at a baby, a toddler, a preschooler, and all they want to do is learn. You put them in public school for 3 or 4 years, and suddenly they have no interest in learning anymore. That is not an age thing. That is an environment thing. If you keep them home, and like Kim said, we can all speak to this. If you keep them home, they will just keep learning if you don't try and bring school home with them. And instead, you are trying to instill imagination and the desire to learn. And it is an amazing thing, and it is very innate when you let go of, just like helping your kids learn to walk, just like helping them learn to crawl up and down the stairs. All the things that you teach your young children before you send them off to public school come easily and innately to you as their mother, because you know when it's the right time. You know when you're doing it for the wrong reasons, and you know when to trust yourself. And the exact same thing will happen in the home education process. Each child will be different, but it will come innate and natural to you to know exactly how to help that child move through their own personal education journey. And it's amazing, and it is honestly, truly, looking back, the best decision we ever made with our family, and it's the reason we have the relationships we have with our children today, because we are a family unit first and always, and the public school didn't take that from us. We were able to keep our family unit together and teach the importance and priority of family over everything else.
Oh, that's so powerful. The idea of, and he delves into that in this book about the distancing of family and how removing children from the home. And it's happening sooner and sooner. I remember when we moved to Florida, Betsy was 3 and she had just turned 3. We went to church and somebody was sitting in the pew in front of us, and they turned around and they said, "Oh, how old's your daughter?" And I said, "Oh, she just turned 3." And they said, "Oh, that's awesome. Here in Florida, kids can, they have free preschool and you can start sending her to school." Like, so we moved there in June. She turned 3 in June. And so they're like, you can send her to free preschool this fall. And I'm thinking, there is no way now I'm sending this child to school. Like, why would I take my 3-year-old out of my home, like because it's such a great way to get them started. They learn so much. They prepares them for the next whatever. But I thought of something, and maybe we could do this on some of these discussions, is we could give some of the tools that we've used to kind of help us in this process. Maybe we pick a tool each episode or something, but I want to suggest the idea of the inventory. This was my very first conference that I went to where I was learning about this. I learned about this tool. It's called like a 6-month inventory is what we referred to it as. And it was a piece that made me realize what was most important for my child. And at this point, Jacob was 11 years old. And the challenge was to go home and to take an hour. That was the time prescribed, to take an hour, go somewhere quiet where I could have some peace, to pray, to ask for divine guidance, to write his name at the top of the piece of paper, top of the page. And then it was a 2-step process. On the first page, to just write down, to brainstorm, to just write down everything I could think of when I thought of him. What were his strengths? What were his weaknesses? What were his dreams? What did I want for him? What were his fears? My fears? What were my worries? Just to kind of get everything out. And that's the first level. And the more that I have kind of learned the process of how to create order from chaos, I recognize that this first level is so important because you have so many thoughts that are swirling around. So I do this a lot with like dream building and goal and vision. And this is the first step, is you have to get all the stuff, the first layer, out of your head and onto a paper where you can see it, because otherwise all those worries, all the fears, all the things will just take up so much time, so much headspace. So you get all that out, and then there's time for another prayer. You're like, all right, so these are all my worries. These are all the things. And then there is the prayer of, what do I need to do to help this child? What can I do? Not what does this child need to do, but what can I do for this child in the next 6 months? What are the things that are most important for their growth, their development, for them to learn, for our connection, for their character? And this is where I really believe your stewardship with God comes in, and it is so strong. This child that you have is his, and he knows this child's mission, and he knows this child's purpose, and he knows he's put this child in your home for a reason, because you love this child and you have what you need, and the Lord will give you what you need to help this child. And so in this partnership, in this moment, this is when you're saying, okay, God, tell me what is most important. And this is where you write down, this is where the Lord will just speak to your heart and whisper things that you have not even thought about. And because you got all that junk out, right? All that stuff that was kind of in there, now you get to the heart of, all right, in the next 6 months, these are the things that matter most for my child. And then that's your curriculum. That's what you take. That's what that child needs to move into and grow into the person that the Lord wants them to be. And it is fascinating how many times when you start looking at that list, where on that list is arithmetic. Like typically, at least my experience of doing this now with 4 children over however many years, 15, 16 years, those academic things, they come up. They certainly come up. There are times when I'm like, oh, it's time for this, it's time for that. But there's so much more that goes into play. And this one little activity, this tool, this will open your mind to the connection that you have to God, to your stewardship over this child, and to be able to see your child for who they are and what they need to do. And for me, 6-month inventories gave my heart so much peace, because this is when I walked with God. This is when I was like, okay, like, Lord, I am imperfect. I don't know what I'm doing, but you know, and we get to walk together. So maybe that's helpful for some of you out there who are trying to figure out, but how do we do it? For me, this was the first step in the how. And when you see God show up and love your child more than you do, this is where you realize, well, I can do this, because if God will talk to you and tell you what to do, you've got it made. And he will, because he knows this child even better than you do.
I love that. And I will add to that it is such a powerful tool when you do that. That's like the most important thing you can do each year when you are beginning your school year, or, Amy said 6-month inventory, 6 months if you can do it, but at least once a year when you do it. And I'm going to add a second part to that. This last year, after I did my inventory for the child, then I made up a list of questions, and Sean and I had a mentor meeting with them, and we called them in and we asked them these questions like, what do you think your mission is? What do you want to accomplish this year? How can we help you do that? And so then they take ownership of it. They help plan the things that they want to do, and they tell you the things that they think they need to work on. And so when it comes time to start your school year, or however you're doing it, they already know what their plan is, and they know that you're there to support them, instead of you being like, okay, you're going to sit here for 2 hours and get your math done, and you're not going to leave the table until it's done. You say, okay, what is your plan for the day? How can I help you? What do you need me to do with that? And it's a whole different attitude and mindset when they have ownership of it. And you know what your goals are for them that you've talked to God about, and then they know what their goals are that they've talked to you about. And it's this whole beautiful thing that happens.
It comes full circle for sure. And we did a similar thing, actually. So I taught my kids how to do inventories. And so when they get old enough, I do an inventory for them and we discuss it. The page that they don't get page number 1. Like, I never showed them page number 1, because page number 1 had all of my fears. They didn't need that, but they got to see page number 2. And there were things on page 1 that I might share, like these are my vision or whatever, but then they learned how to do that. So then they would bring, and that would lead us into, and we could maybe talk about this on the next one, like FEC and some of those other kinds of things, but like them taking ownership. And that's a leadership principle. This is a teaching moment. This is showing them how to take responsibility for their own education, and that they have, and they get to step into that. And we didn't start doing that until later. I mean, Jacob was 11 when we started doing this, and it took time. So, but the cool thing is you're learning, you're hearing this, you're catching things that it took us years to kind of figure out. But I think, well, the whole premise, the first myth of education is that you can give someone an education. And this is one of those partnership pieces where they have responsibility.
Well, and I think going back to this book, Dumbing Us Down, and like you were saying, that if you're listening to this and you're questioning your own family's education and where you go from here, like Amy said, the myth that you could educate someone else. It is not your job to educate your children, but it is your job for you to get the education that you need. And so if you are looking for knowledge and understanding of what kind of education your children need, you need to have you need to see both sides. You need to see all the sides. You need all the information so that you can come to your own conclusion. And for me, that's what this book, Dumbing Us Down, did, is it drew back the curtain behind the truth of public school. The side that even those of us who homeschool pretend isn't there because we do not want to offend anyone. And so if you're looking at this as maybe an alternative, something that you want to do, that you really want to make sure that your children are being raised with your morals, your beliefs, your ethics, raised to know how to think and to change the world, going into this book with an open mind and asking God to allow you to let go of preconceived notions about public school, about your own education, about what might be happening in your local public school, and read it with an open heart and see what speaks to you and where God is trying to direct you and your family, that there might be something else out there for you.
Oh, that is so good. And
Well said.
I think we're coming to kind of a natural conclusion of this. We want to encourage you, grab this book, go read it. I'm going to share what I shared with my friend who was like, is this anti-public school? Should I step away? Should I read this? And I explained to her, we just, in our discussion, she's here for a reason. She's curious. She's wondering. She's worried. There's all kinds of things. And like she explained, she's like, I know that this is the right place for my daughter right now. And I would never presume to say that I know anything about what's happening in anybody's family but my own. I am the expert in my family, and you are the expert in your family. And what I know is that things come to us piece by piece, is that God puts people, He puts books, He puts experiences in our life when we need them so that we can build upon them. And so maybe right now you're just in an exploratory phase and you're just gathering information, and there's actually nothing better that you could be doing right now than that exact thing. So your kids are in school and you're just trying to figure it out. That's okay. You have you are doing the best that you can right now for your kids. Keep learning. Don't not read this book because you are afraid of what you might uncover. Read the book and allow it just to sit there while you're continuing to ask and you're continuing to learn, because as you line upon line, you will learn what you need. And I absolutely believe that when you are walking with the Lord in regards to your child, that He will help you to know the right time and the right thing. And because He loves them even more than you do. So He's going to help you know what is right for them. So we are so grateful that you are here and that you are participating with us. We will be back in a couple weeks. And so go grab your copy, read it, and we'll be discussing it and debriefing it then.